Weird hardware, a necessity for gracious living. The Super ACAN is one of the most obscure game consoles in existence, and yet it has an unusually compelling story to tell. This extremely rare and largely forgotten machine isn't just another knockoff or clone. Instead, it was a legitimate attempt to create an original console. Even more incredibly, it came out of Taiwan, a region more commonly associated at the time with famiclones and bootlegs rather than with frontline innovation. Unlike the countless imitators flooding the market, the Super ACAN was designed to go toe-to-toe with two of the most iconic systems in history, the Super Nintendo and the Sega Megadrive, right in the middle of the greatest console war of all time. This fallen soldier of the 16-bit era was created with passion, ambition, and an admirable dose of naivety. Its creators genuinely hoped the humble ACAN would become a household name and secure a place within the fast-growing gaming industry. However, things did not go as expected. I am Lady Decade. Hit the subscribe button, as this is the story of the Super ACAN, the forgotten system of the 16-bit console war. If you're watching a video about the Super ACAN, then chances are you've got quite the exquisite taste in obscure gaming history, and you're probably a bit of a games hoarder too, like me. So why not build up your digital collection for next to nothing? Use my discount codes in the pinned comment to save up to 90% on thousands of games and support my work simultaneously. Whether it's modern or retro, there are plenty of deals to plunder. Everybody wins, so enjoy it. To begin our journey into the history of this long-lost platform, we must once again travel back to the early 90s, and by now, I'm sure you already know what that means: the epic clash of the titans, the Sega Megadrive versus the Super Nintendo. The two Japanese platforms would dominate huge market shares during this time, but Japan wasn't the only Asian nation looking to profit from the ongoing gaming revolution. As regular viewers of this channel will know, we've spent a fair bit of time discussing Taiwan's contributions to gaming, and let's face it, we've covered them a hell of a lot. For example, Taiwan was a hotbed for the production of famiclone systems, cheap and cheerful, or sometimes cheerless, knockoffs of the Nintendo Famicom that flooded markets around the world. Alongside these came a surprising number of technically impressive bootleg games that let players enjoy the likes of Street Fighter 2, Donkey Kong Country, and Super Mario World on humble 8-bit hardware, or at least some mangled facsimile of them. Of course, no discussion of this scene would be complete without mentioning the legendary Hummer team. Their Frankensteinian creations such as Samari, a bizarre and barely functional hybrid of Sonic the Hedgehog and Super Mario Bros., became internet curiosities for years to come, embodying the chaotic charm of the bootleg era. But today's topic is not a cheap clone or a hilarious knockoff. No, today's story is no laughing matter. The Super ACAN was a legitimate console with its own bespoke library of games and grand ambitions to take over Taiwan's domestic gaming market. Now, while we've often discussed Taiwanese games and the hardware they run on, we haven't spent much time examining the actual market conditions in Taiwan itself, and it's time we rectified that. In the early 1990s, video game sales in Taiwan were strong, and that's hardly surprising. The country was experiencing what economists dubbed the Taiwan Miracle, part of a rapid industrial boom that also included South Korea, Singapore, and Hong Kong, the so-called Four Asian Tigers. While Hong Kong and Singapore emerged as global financial centres, Taiwan and South Korea became dominant in electronics manufacturing, churning out everything from semiconductors to motherboards. It was the perfect environment to support a domestic games console. With all that in mind, it's hardly surprising that many game consoles, legitimate or otherwise, were manufactured in Taiwan. From unlicensed clones to surprisingly complex hardware knockoffs, Taiwan had become a major hub for all things electronic, and nestled in among the Famiclones was something different. The Super 8-can was created by a company known as Funtech, an entity that even today has a mysterious air about it, with very little information readily available online. But if you dig deep enough, you'll find that Funtech was simply the anglicised name for a brand called Dun Wang Technology, a subsidiary of the much larger United Microelectronics Corporation, or UMC. Now, UMC wasn't just anybody. Founded in 1980, it was Taiwan's first semiconductor company, and it played a pivotal role in establishing the island as a global leader in high-tech manufacturing. UMC led the charge in producing the chips that powered countless electronic devices worldwide, making it, on paper, a company more than capable of developing a home console. But let's not sugarcoat it, competing with the likes of Nintendo and Sega. That's a big ask. So then, what was the plan? How was this underdog going to carve out a market niche amidst the fiercest console war in gaming history? The goal for UMC's Funtech was simple: create a home console more powerful than the Super Nintendo and Megadrive. But they didn't stop there. They also aimed to make games tailored for the Taiwanese market and undercut the Japanese giants on price.
Are you serious?
It was a three-pronged approach: better hardware, localized content, and affordability, all powered by Taiwan's world-class manufacturing sector. On paper, the plan didn't sound too bad, but as history has shown, raw specs alone don't guarantee success. Just ask the creators of the Atari Jaguar or 3DO. Do the math. However, as with all great underdog stories, the real challenge came when theory met practice. Because building a console from scratch, especially when it's your first time, is not as simple as scribbling a plan on a napkin and calling it a day, Funtech quickly began to hit stumbling blocks. Developing hardware and an original game library simultaneously turned out to be much more difficult than anticipated. The scale of the task proved overwhelming. I mean, it's all very well and good to say you're going to build a successful console, but actually doing it? Well, that's a different kettle of fish altogether. Just ask Tommy Tallarico. So on that note, was the Super 8-can doomed to be vaporware? Well, obviously not. You've just seen me holding one in this video. So unless I've become extremely talented at deep faking plastic, we can safely say it was real. So while the Super 8-can did eventually make it to market, the process of developing and manufacturing an entirely new game console from scratch ended up taking Funtech bloody years. This 16-bit machine designed to compete with the Super Nintendo and Sega Megadrive wouldn't actually end up being ready to hit store shelves until October of 1995. Now, you don't need a PhD in gaming history to work out why this was an absolute disaster. By 1995, the gaming landscape had undergone drastic changes. The new generation of 32-bit consoles had already landed and were fast gaining traction. Power, multimedia features, and 3D graphics were the new battleground, and the humble 8-can looked like it had shown up to a laser fight with a wooden spoon. Both the Sony PlayStation and the Sega Saturn had arrived. The PlayStation would go on to become one of the most successful consoles of all time, while the Saturn, although less successful in the West, made a significant impact across Asia. The Super 8-can, on the other hand, wasn't some cutting-edge 32-bit revolution. Instead, it looked and felt like exactly what it was, a 16-bit system that had arrived to the party several years late, wearing someone else's trousers. Even within the 16-bit space, the competition had evolved. By this point, both Nintendo and Sega had spent years extracting every last drop of performance from their hardware. Their games looked and played better than ever. Just take a glance at Killer Instinct or the Donkey Kong Country trilogy. These were showcases of what mature 16-bit development looked like. And by comparison, the Super ACAN? Well, let's just say, it didn't exactly drop jaws. By October of 1995, with the Super ACAN finally crawling over that finish line and onto store shelves, Funtech found itself in desperate need of a miracle. So, naturally, they did what any scrappy underdog would do. They went full throttle on marketing. The company launched an aggressive promotional campaign, doubling down on comparisons with existing 16-bit systems in the hope of carving out a niche. Essentially, they took a page straight from the Sega of America and Tom Kalinske playbook, attempting to convince the public that the Super ACAN wasn't just an alternative, but the cool console to own. As part of their pitch, Funtech boasted that the system would feature over 30 games, with many of them reportedly ready to launch fairly early in the system's life. Whether this was blind optimism or good old-fashioned marketing bluff is still up for debate, but it was the promise they led with. Under the hood, the ACAN was powered by a Motorola 68000 CPU, the same processor found in the Sega Megadrive, the Neo Geo, the Sharp X68000, and even the original Apple Macintosh. It was a solid, reliable chip, but hardly cutting edge by 1995 standards. Visually, the system's design took more than a few cues from its Japanese rivals, with its layout of power, eject and reset buttons, and that distinctive top-loading cartridge slot. The ACAN clearly echoed the aesthetic of the Super Nintendo. Its controller ports, meanwhile, were 9-pin male D connectors, the same style used by the Megadrive, the Atari VCS and other classic platforms. In short, it looked like a games console. It had the right buttons, the right shape, the right ports, but looks alone weren't going to win the war. So, that's the hardware, but what about the games? Out of the 30 games originally planned for the Super ACAN, a grand total of 12 would see release, and not a single one of them managed to demonstrate that the system was in any way more powerful than the Super Nintendo or Sega Mega Drive. In fact, quite the opposite. Most ACAN games looked crude and unpolished in comparison to what was already available on the competition, and we're talking years into their lifespans, mind you. Among this rather underwhelming library was Speedy Dragon, a game that, at a glance, is very obviously a Sonic the Hedgehog clone. Except, instead of Sonic, you play as a kid wielding a baseball bat, not a dragon, not a hedgehog, a kid with a bat. Aside from this shameless rip-off factor, Speedy Dragon commits a far greater sin. You can't damage enemies by jumping on them, you have to whack them with a bat instead, which slows down the pace dramatically and defeats the entire point of gotta go fast. Stick with Samari if you want a real disaster piece. Then there's Boom Zoo, and as you can see, this one does not attempt to hide what it's copying. It's Bomberman. Pure and simple. Except worse. It's functional enough, I suppose, but it's hard to imagine anyone buying a brand new, obscure game console just to play a watered-down clone of a game they could already get elsewhere. Better and cheaper. Then we come to Journey to the Laugh, widely considered to be the best game on the Super ACAN, and when I say widely, I'm using that word extremely generously. The game itself is a basic mascot platformer, the kind of thing you'd find buried in the mid-tier depths of the SNES or the Mega Drive libraries, or more likely, the Amiga's bargain bin. There's nothing wrong with it exactly, but there's certainly nothing about it that screams killer app. Still, with only 12 games on the system, it stands out more than it has any right to. It's just a platformer, but on one of the most obscure consoles ever made, so that's something, I guess. Finally, to round off this little rogues gallery, I present to you this utter ridiculousness. Adventure in Africa. a Monopoly-style board game with some highly questionable in-game art, the kind of art that would probably make Prince Philip rise from the grave and shake his head in disapproval. Why do I say this? Because it is a game where you can choose to play as Adolf Hitler.
Don't mention the war. I mentioned it once, but I think I got away with it. I don't know with that in the workplace.
Literally Hitler. Now, sadly, I can't read the local language, so I've got no earthly idea why this game exists or what the goal is, but the fact remains. This bloody bizarre title allows you to select the Führer as your character for a jolly old jaunt around Africa. So, those were some of the more, how shall I put it, memorable games available for the Super ACAN. As you can see, there is not a single title in the lineup that could be seriously classified as a system seller. Well, unless you're one of those weirdos who collects obscure Nazi memorabilia, and in that case, knock yourself out. So, with a terrible library of games, no killer app, and the industry marching forward into 3D gaming, was this a final nail in the coffin for the Super ACAN? Well, not quite. Because Funtech still had one last bombshell to drop on the gaming world. A mushroom cloud-shaped bomb that looked suspiciously like this. Oh, dear God, no. Yes, this ridiculous piece of hardware was Funtech's bonkers plan to save the ACAN from oblivion. Once again borrowing tactics from Sega of America, though this time copying one of their more questionable decisions. Funtech unveiled a ridiculous add-on designed to boost the ACAN's power. Visually and conceptually, it was a shameless clone of the Sega 32X. Thankfully, this balmy add-on never made it to market. It was quietly canned, because most likely, Funtech had the good sense to notice just how badly the Sega 32X bombed, so at the very least, they dodged one final humiliating bullet. Ultimately, the ACAN's later release and the arrival of the 32-bit generation, as we've already discussed, sealed its fate. By the time it hit shelves, the market had moved on, and there was simply no demand left for a new 16-bit console. All in all, the Super ACAN never gave consumers any compelling reason to choose it over more established, better supported systems. It didn't have superior graphics, it didn't have any must-play games, it didn't have the brand recognition, and it certainly didn't have time on its side. The commercial failure of the ACAN was catastrophic. Funtech reportedly lost over $6 million, a massive blow for a company banking on local success. By 1996, the Super ACAN was quietly discontinued. In a desperate attempt to claw back some of their losses, Funtech even went as far as to disassemble unsold consoles and sell off the individual components to other companies, a move that only added to the rarity of the surviving units. This lack of success, combined with the fact that so many consoles were physically dismantled, has made the Super ACAN extremely rare and eye-wateringly expensive on the collector's market today. Its complete lack of presence in the wider gaming world, paired with its pitiful library of games, has reduced the ACAN to little more than a footnote in the grand history of video games. But it's a damn good footnote. A strange, obscure, uniquely Taiwanese story that deserves to be remembered. As I stated earlier in the video, if you're watching a video about the Super ACAN, then the chances are you've got quite exquisite taste in obscure gaming history, and you're probably a bit of a games hoarder too, like I am. So why not build up your digital collection for next to nothing? Use my discount codes in the pinned comment to save up to 90% on thousands of games and support my work at the same time. Whether it's modern games or retro, there are plenty of deals to plunder. Everybody wins, and if you'd like to support my work in a more personal way, you can access my behind-the-scenes cosplay library and more by becoming a backer over on Patreon.
Oi. Oi.